and comments. Now, without further ado, here's your host, L.Nathan Hare.
All right, here we go. Living now, living right now. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host here for this next hour at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. Our principal sponsor, of course, the Community Action Organization of Western New York, still fighting the war on poverty. Now in our 52nd year, and in a few weeks, we will start our 53rd year. I want to welcome all of you again to this hour of insight, introspection, and interpretation of facts, events, and trends affecting you right here and right now in Buffalo and the Western New York community, and in fact, connecting to communities all across the country. Each week, we focus on things we think will be of interest to you, which will serve to motivate you and serve to connect you to the broader issues that affect our communities here in Western New York. Today's program is live, so you can call and you can join our discussion. Hope that you will. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. And I just want to welcome all of you back to the show. Hopefully you had a good experience with Brother Sam Radford, who did the show for me last week. I want to build today's program, and thank you, Sam, for all the work that you do in helping me during these periods when I'm not able to be here. I want to build on the ideas that Sam discussed with you, hopefully last week. The core premise of last week's discussion was that the Trump administration, his Secretary of Education, not only does not believe in public school education as a concept. She actually is for using public money through tax credit scholarships, education savings accounts, direct per capita school funding, and other policies and cash transfers. She believes in using public money to finance private school education, and not just private school education, for-profit private school education. That's the core of the policy of Betsy DeVos, and the fact that Trump hired her, knowing this about her, has to mean that that's his policy framework for education in this country. The direct experience that we have seen of that ideology of Betsy DeVos and my belief of President Trump, if you look in the places where Betsy DeVos has had power, in Detroit, Michigan, in its public school system, and now in the public school systems across the state of Michigan, four basic things we learned. First, almost 2/3 of all of Michigan's charter schools are now run by for-profit management companies. Just wrap your arms around that. We're not talking about charter schools that are, not-for-profit, basically public schools that are just operated below the level of the district's Board of Education, where the school is controlled by a board of trustees for that school, but they're basically public schools. Not talking about that. We're talking about for-profit, private charter schools. 2/3 of all of the schools in the state of Michigan are now operated by for-profit, private charter schools. What they found is that the standardized test scores in the charter schools across Michigan, when they're compared with the standardized test scores of regular public schools in Michigan, that they were no more than comparable to those of the traditional public schools. In other words, you spent all of this money to transfer all of this wealth into the hands of these private for-profit operators, claiming that it was going to create better educational outcomes for the students. And what you find is that when you look at the educational outcomes of the kids in these for-profit private charter schools, and you look at the outcomes of the kids in traditional public schools, the outcomes are no different. So you spend $1 billion and you got nothing in return. Well, you got something in return. You got a bunch of people, private people, who got a lot of, they got their hands on $1 billion of money that they had not gotten their hands on before. What they also found was that, and this is important, they found that lower income students in the state of Michigan are effectively segregated into poor performing schools, while the parents of more privileged students who were better equipped to navigate the system, have been able to keep themselves out of those poor performing schools. I'll get to that in just 1 second. But I want to make this point. Tom Watkins, who is the Michigan State former education superintendent, a man who actually favors charter schools, not Betsy DeVos's type charter schools, but he was a fan, of charter schools. His observation is that in a number of cases, people are making a boatload of money and kids are not getting educated. Now, that's what I want us to understand. That's what I want us to get our arms around, in today's discussion, because that's the threat that the Trump administration, through its Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, that's the threat to the institution of public school education in the United States. Let me talk for a quick second about this issue of more privileged parents being better equipped to navigate the school choice system in the state of Michigan. Well, what are the choices that you have? If you're assigned to a school in the district that your child, that you and your child live in, the residential district that your child lives in, and you don't like that school, or if, like in Buffalo, you just, they claim you get school choice. And I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who does the live streaming of the program. And by the way, you can go in on Facebook and type in Living Now, Living NOW, Living Now, and the program will come up. You'll be able to see us on air, but you'll also be able to type in your questions or observations or your concerns, and I'll respond to them on the air. And so, as we talk about this idea of school choice and the people who have more resources being empowered to be able to manipulate the school choice system, here's what I'm talking about. You get assigned to a school based on your residence, your address, or as in Buffalo, you get this, 4 or 5 choices. You put, little bubbles, whatever they do on the application, you say you want this your first choice, second choice, down to 5 choices, but the likelihood that you're going to get your first choice is like slim and almost none, maybe less than that. And so you end up really being assigned to a school. So your child gets assigned to a school, and let's say that you as a parent don't like that school. You've done some research, you've found out what the school's history of success, has been, and so you want to move your child to a different school. So the first thing you can do is try to get your child into a school in the district that you think will better serve your child. That may mean that you have to get your child to that school. You may have to transport your child to that school. Obviously, people that have jobs that are flexible, people that have cars are better able to operate that kind of flexibility. Let's suppose that you live, like in Buffalo, let's suppose you live over on Zenner Street, like a block or two from Bailey, and on the east side of Bailey, it's Cheektowaga, and there's a school over there in Cheektowaga in, say, the Maryville School District, and you think your child would do better in that school district than they would do in the district that your child's been assigned to in Buffalo. Well, if you got family that live in Cheektowaga, and you know what I'm saying, right? You get to use their address, and so now you become a Cheektowaga student, and it's very rare that anybody in the majority community in Cheektowaga will turn you in, even though they know you don't live in the Cheektowaga school district. But Lord, don't you be an African parent and try to use somebody's address that lives in Cheektowaga, because there'll probably be 75 parents that will turn you in immediately, right? And they won't just turn you in, then the county will charge you with a crime of theft of education services. And you are very likely, if you can't pay back to the school district the money, what they claim is the per capita cost of your education in Cheektowaga, they will put you in jail. There are people in jail right now because they were accused of stealing public education services, okay, in an adjacent school district. So people that are privileged, they have resources. People that can have their kids individually tutored, are able to get their kids into schools that you have to test into, like City Honors and Hutch Tech and so on. Well, those parents who have the resources to be able to provide that kind of support, that kind of jump start for their children, they're able to get their kids into schools that are the higher performing schools and so on. So that's what I'm referring to when I say that the parents of more privileged students are better equipped to navigate the school choice system. The president of the American Federation of Teachers, a woman named Randy Weingarten, she referred to Betsy DeVos as the most ideological anti-public education nominee put forward since President Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education back in the 1980 period during Jimmy Carter's a single term. Mother Jones magazine observed that the previous Republican administrations, they were not fans of public school education, but they didn't threaten the very existence of public education and their various teacher unions. What Weingarten observed was that the Trump administration, in her mind, represented an existential threat to a basic, in fact, possibly the most basic democratic institution, the public schools. Trump has picked a secretary who is actually hostile to public schools. This is unprecedented. Keep in mind that the ideology that the Trump administration believes in is no different than the ideology that drove the disparate treatment between African people and Anglo-Saxon Caucasian people in this country prior to the Civil War and after the Civil War. I was talking with Emmanuel about this, and Emmanuel, you can comment on this as we talk about this piece of the story. I want you to wrap your mind around something. We're being told by these Trump people, these Tea Party people, these neo-conservatives, neo-something, type people and whatnot. We're being told that what should occur in America is we shouldn't have to pay all of these taxes to have all of these social programs and whatnot. People should volunteer. They should give their money to charities and volunteer organizations and mutual aid societies, and so on, right? And then those organizations should provide the services that people need in the population. This shouldn't be coming out of tax dollars. Well, think about that for just a second. They had that structure before the Civil War. How many programs did you see were going on that were providing education supports and homeless housing support, and so on, right? Job support, for people. In fact, African people's first crisis after the Civil War was massive unemployment. Think about the craziness of this. You got to wrap your minds around this concept. In the conceptualization of America, and the people that ran America, Tommy Jefferson, John Quincy Adams, right? Our founders, right? In their mind, you being conscripted as a slave, being snatched, kidnapped, pummeled, tied, put in in shackles and so on, and pressed into forced labor on plantation slave camps. That was considered to be you're employed. You had a job. What's your job? Slave. That was your job, right? And so when they abolished slavery, all of a sudden you lost your job. The people who lived in this country at the time, they didn't just say, oh, we'll hire all of these people and whatnot, and now we'll pay the people that we have been conscripting for free, for all of these centuries. Now we're going to start paying these people, wages and so on. That's not what happened. It did happen for some, but large numbers of African people wound up not having a job at all. And then what they did is they made not having a job a crime. Now, no, they got words for it. I'm not making this up. Don't take my word for it. They got words for it. They call it vagrancy. And vagrancy, I'm not making this up. Vagrancy in 1865 America became a crime. Now, there were vagrants in the North. There were vagrants amongst Caucasians in the South. But that wasn't a crime. But as soon as they abolished slavery, then in order to address the issue of all of these African people, I can't see that far. There you go. They addressed the issue of for all of these African people by making the fact that you didn't have a job, they made that a crime. So you had to take a job for any kind of money, for any kind of thing, under any kind of circumstances. You had to do that or wind up in a slave camp.
So if you got convicted
of vagrancy,
you would just be put back into where you were.
Right. You would go into a penal colony, and then you'd be put into into a chain gang, right? And you would be breaking rocks or digging ditches or, planting people's crops for free like you were in the first place. Because remember, in the United States Constitution, it doesn't say that slavery itself was abolished. It just said that the institution, didn't even say the word institution. It says that slavery is abolished in these United States. Then it has a comma. And it says, except as a punishment for being duly convicted of a crime. So they first said that slavery was preserved forever as the punishment. There's no word like the word corrections. The word correction doesn't appear in the Constitution anywhere. You read the whole document, the word corrections does not appear. Rehabilitation. The word rehabilitation does not exist in the Constitution at all, right? So this idea that it's somehow constitutional for you to use public money to correct people and to rehabilitate people, that's just your fanciful thinking. That's not in the Constitution. The Constitution has a consequence for being punished as a punishment for being convicted of a crime. The punishment is to enslave the person who was convicted. Now, how do you get convicted of a crime? You do something that's against the law. So what we do is we change the law. So now you were walking around the country in the South, eating mangoes, whatever it is you were doing to survive if you didn't have a job. And now we make the mere fact that you don't have a job, that became a crime in the United States. So listen, that's going to be, we're going to begin to really get into this, but I want to take our first break, and then we'll get back into our subject. You all stick with us. We will sit inside of the break here at Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right, welcome back. Here we go again, Living Now, here at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. Here with Emmanuel Radford, doing the live streaming of the program. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. So I'm trying to help us to understand when I refer to the Trump administration as representing an existential threat. Existential means that something threatens the actual existence of a thing. Just keep that in mind. The Andrew Jackson, post-war, a Civil War president of the United States, represented an existential threat to the existence of free African people in the United States because he despised African people. did not want the word citizenship and African people to appear in the same sentence ever. So he did everything in his power to empower those racist-oriented Caucasian people to continue to oppress and repress and demonize and subjugate African people throughout his administration. You'll hear, people today talk sort of, how shall I say, introspectively, about Andrew Jackson, or reflectively about Andrew Jackson, like, well, that is true, what you're saying, but he was a populist, he was all for championing the working class, and the lower guy, as opposed to big business. So how am I supposed to feel about that? You want to return me to enslavement, right? You want to put me in penal colonies and so on, right? You do everything you can to to hurt me as a community of people. I'm supposed to like you because you were a populist? This is the craziness that we live, because that's what we're living with right now, right? I mean, the Trump administration it's not that every single thing that he champions is completely worthless. I mean, you can't say, a broke clock keeps the correct time twice a day, right? So there's always going to be something that this fellow is going to say that is actually true, even if it's by accident, which it probably is, if it's him, it's by accident. But what we're talking about is not the fact that you said something that was true or valid. What we're talking about is you representing an existential threat to the existence of something, right? So he hires this Betsy DeVos. The reason why, let me go back to this point. The reason why at the end of the Depression, they created Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, those kinds of initiatives, is because prior to the Great Depression, there were no programs to ensure that you had health care if you got sick. There were no programs to ensure that you had a house if something happened and you ended up being homeless. There were no programs to ensure that you got mental health care if you got sick in the head as opposed to being sick in your body. There was no universal public education system. This you got to understand. See, we think about public school education as if when they founded America, they also founded, public school education. That's not true. Okay, public school education is the outcome of freed African people after the end of the Civil War, who were now able to vote, right? For those that they allowed to, were able to vote. They used their voting power to vote into state budgets, public school or public funding of education, so that all of these African people who had been denied the right to learn how to read, to write, to count, to have an education for 300 years, 250 years, to allow them to be able to have an opportunity to learn enough that they could erect themselves as citizens, economically and socially independent, self-sufficient citizens in the United States. In order to get that done, they voted to get public money, state money, to go into state-funded public school education. Because that began to spread across the South, it became a model that got picked up in Congress, and it became a national model. But that push was because African people pushing to create structures that enable them to be able to erect themselves as empowered citizens in the United States. They're the ones who pushed for public school education. That's how it came about. Who tells you about the fact that the reason why you got public school education in the United States right now is because of the advocacy and the political fight that was waged by African people in the United States? They're the reason why you have public school education in the United States right now. But I want you to go a little bit further with that. Prior to the time that there was public school education, how did people get educated? Them people living out there in the sticks in Appalachia, in the wilderness in Missouri, they lived out in Colorado, they lived in the backwoods of Georgia and so on. How did they get educated? They didn't. That's the truth. They didn't get educated. The people who got educated were the people who were the children of folks that had means. If you had means, you went and you paid out of your pocket to a school to educate your child. If you didn't have the means to do it, your child didn't get educated. Your child's education was pulling the trigger, on a shotgun. Well, of course, that's the same model of education to have right now. But it's important for us to understand that that's what education was about prior to the end of the Civil War and the so-called Reconstruction period. That's what education was about. So who were the people that got educated and who were the people that didn't? You didn't see the coolies, the Chinese people. They weren't benefiting from that education system. You didn't see the, people that were not the sons and daughters of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They were not benefiting from that education system. Education was done by, if you were a Calvinist, you can go to a Calvinist-oriented school. If you were Catholic, you can go to a Catholic school. If you were a evangelical, or not evangelical, Episcopalian, you can go to an Episcopalian school. Baptist, you go to a Baptist school. That's how people got educated, was through usually religious organizations or some kind of philanthropic organization that operated a school. You have a comment came in? Mm-hmm.
The first one is, do you care to speak about what's going on in Palestine, Israel, with the Trump administration? And then the second question is, how can we make sure truth is being taught to our children and to us?
Okay, so let me take these. These are kind of disparate subjects or whatnot. So let me take the Palestine-Israel thing from the beginning. There was an assertion made in a program that I watched while I was down in Palm Beach a few days ago, where a fellow came on and asserted that the Jerusalem has been the historical capital of Israel since 900 or whatever, BC. Let's think about that for just a second, okay? Because people say things because they sound true that make absolutely no sense whatsoever, okay? Number one, there was no such thing as the United Monarchy of Israel until Saul became the king of Israel, and they weren't united at that time, right? It was only the tribe of Benjamin, a couple other tribes, that came together. It took about 20 years to get the 12 tribes to come together at that point. When David becomes the king of Israel, they had complete consolidation of all 12 of the tribes. Solomon had control during Solomon's reign, that's David's son, and then it disappears again, right? And there's no united monarchy, at that point. Thank you. Yep, I will get to that. Yep. And so there was no united monarchy. When the Assyrians conquered Israel in 721, 722 BC, the northern kingdom was completely wiped out. It never reassembled itself again. The southern kingdom of Israel was the tribe of Judah that was called Judah, right? It was conquered it was conquered in 586 or so BC. They resurrected themselves about 75 years later, got conquered again. They never became an independent nation again. They were just a subjugated people, under the Assyrians, then the Greeks, and the Greeks, and so on. Let me get these and then we'll get to that caller. And so this whole Palestine-Israel thing is based on people asserting something that to your religion's construct, you may think that that's true, but there was no Israel from basically the time of Greece, and the Assyrians on. There was no Israel at all. There were a people that called themselves Israelites, and they did at some point come, in their history, they lived in Palestine. But the Bible itself tells you that the people that are called Israelites were actually Hittites and Amorites. That's not me making that up. Just read your own Bible. That's read Ezekiel, right? I think it's a 14th chapter. It tells you that, your father was a Hittite, your mother was an Amorite. So this is an ideological desire, by the Israelite or Jewish people, but this is not a fact, okay? So that's important. The Palestinian people were the people that were living in Palestine before the Amorites and the Hittites came, and they're the people that were living in Palestine when the Israelites lived there, and they were the people that lived in Palestine when the Israelites left. If anybody can talk about they have an aboriginal relationship to Palestine, it's the Hittites and the Amorites, because they were always there. So that's, and not just them, but all of the other, Canaanite people that lived there at that time. And so I missed the second question about truth being. We'll take this last. Let me take this call first, and I'll try to pick that up in a second. Hi, caller, are you there? Hello? Hi, caller.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Okay, is that Bob?
I can't hear a thing, Nathan. So I just want to say
you got to turn your radio.
Just a couple of
Bob,
things.
Bob, turn your
talk
radio.
About Israel.
Bob,
Remember,
turn your
you go
radio
back
off.
to Joshua and
Bob, turn your radio off, because you're getting. That's why we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, you can go back to Joshua chapter 5, 13, 14, 15, when Christ himself showed up with Joshua. And remember, there were the 10 plagues because Egypt had 10 gods, and they were led to the promised land, and Christ himself was crucified in Jerusalem, and he did curse the fig tree, and Jerusalem did fall because they fell out of the favor of God. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a place among God and Israel.
But Bob, before you go further, okay, because I think it's important that we always put facts on the table.
I can hardly hear you, Nathan.
But hear me now. It's the issue isn't whether or not there was an Israel. No one's arguing that issue. The issue is whether or not it is a legitimate assertion that Palestine, that Jerusalem, or that Israel, or Palestine is the aboriginal homeland of the Israelites, and that they're the ones who have the right to that land. When there were people that lived in the land before the Israelites got there, the same people lived in the land when the Israelites were there, and when the Israelites left over 2,700 years ago, the Israelites left, and the people that were there before the Israelites, who were there while the Israelites lived there, and who lived there after the Israelites were gone, those people are still there. How is it that Israel gets to assert that it's their land when it hasn't been their land for 2,700 years? It's been somebody else's land over that time period. That's the only point that I'm trying to get people to understand.
I understand that. Let me respond to this. Okay, they got a guy in Turkey that's been arrested because he's a Christian and teaching Christianity. And in our old school systems, Christianity has been taken out. Which would they go with the separation of church and state? And there is no separation of church and state in the Constitution. It just says we will not take one religion over another. We won't take Quakers over Protestants or Catholics over Presbyterians. Now, just hear me out for a moment, because I'm just going to finish up. Because you talk about justice. My son just went to court trying to see his child, and it's the best interest of the child. And you know what? The mother went to Florida, and he still doesn't see her. Neither have I. But you know what? It was 8 years ago this Thursday when you and I made a decision for this world. And remember the covenant that was bound between you and I and our Father, the Lord thy God? And that 4 months later, a neutron star that had pulled a white dwarf into it, a secondary star, all life on this planet should be dead. But yet they don't sit there and honor the gift that was given. Not whatsoever. So all I'm going to say is this. You know what? I wish that people could get along and that we could just be good to one another, because at some point there is another section of the Bible. They call it Revelations chapter 6. And when that finally fulfills itself, you know what? It's going to be too late for a great portion of humanity. So what I'm going to say, Nathan, is God bless you. I love listening to you, and I'm going to hang up and listen to the rest of your program, my friend. God bless you and your family.
God bless. Thanks, Bob. And so a question was asked, how do we know, how can we make sure that truth is being taught to our children and to us? And there is no magic answer to that. What you have to do is you have to do research yourself. You have to go to the sources of where people are getting the information that they're saying to you and test whether or not what's being said is actually true. So when someone tells you, for example, that George Washington was the first president of the United States, you have to understand that question in context. If they were asking you who was the first president of the United States who was elected by the popular vote of the people that live in the United States, that would have been George Washington. But he didn't become Showtime until 1789. The Constitution was actually put together in 1781. It took a period of time for the Constitution to be ratified by all of the states, at that time. And during the course of the time it took to get the Constitution ratified, there were presiders over the Senate and the House of Representatives. So that the first president, John Wagner, who was the first president of the United States, he was elected by the representatives that were elected to the House of the Senate and the House of Representatives. That was the first president. There were several. There were, I don't know how many there were. It may have been 7 or 8 presidents over the course of that time before George Washington was the president. We know that George Washington or that John Wagner was considered to be the president because there's a letter written by George Washington to John Wagner. Was his name John Wagner? I'm thinking you'll get it. I may have his last name wrong. But there was a letter written to him because he had issued an executive order making Thanksgiving a national holiday. The letter written by George Washington to him refers to him as the president of the United States. So we know that the people in the country considered John Wagner to be the president of the United States in 1781 or 1783. I think it was 1781 when that letter was written. We have another caller. Hang on, let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you great. How you doing?
Good, man, good. I have a question there.
Sure.
You were just talking about Israel and stuff.
Right.
Why is it on this planet here, between Israel, Cyprus, the Dardanelles, Black Sea, Aral Sea, Anatolia, why is that part of the world so contested? If you look at the maps, even ancient maps, names keep changing over and over again, and these people don't want to get along. Why don't you just move out that area altogether?
Well, I don't know how to say that. Here's what you really have to understand about the area of Palestine per se, and the areas that are adjacent to that. If you think about where Africa is, think about where Europe is, think about where Asia is, think about where Asia Minor or Africa Minor is. In order for people to trade with other peoples, they had to go through that corridor that took you from Africa across Asia Minor. Yeah, there you go. Hanson, that's what I was trying to think of. Africa Minor, and to take you up into Europe, going through Turkey, or through Syria, going through to Asia, and so on. This area was very important to people's commerce during the course of that time period. So there was always a lot of struggle for who got to control this axis, this route that allowed people to be able to trade with each other. So I have and I'm just saying this sort of facetiously, but I have this sort of concept. If you remember in your Hans and Gretel type era, stories, they talked about these trolls, right? And in order to get from one place to another, you had to go across a bridge. And the trolls lived under the bridge. And you couldn't get across the bridge unless you paid the troll something. Well, I look at these people that live in this corridor between Africa Minor, Asia, and Europe, that live in that corridor. I look at them as what I call the troll economy people. It's not that they make a whole lot of stuff, but they make the fact that you have to walk past them to get from one place to another, and you had to pay them. So there was always this struggle for people to become the ones who controlled that area, because that allowed you to control the vast amount of economy that was taking place in the world outside of, the Indo-China continent. Does that make sense?
Hear that? Hey, one more question.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you. Go ahead.
If you look at those people, you take their DNA, they're all related to each other.
No question. So this is just absolutely senseless, okay? It's absolutely senseless for these people to be in this kind of hatred towards each other when they are each other. You know, when we were kids, I don't know how old you are, but when I was a child, they used to refer to something as anti-Semitism. There used to be Lebanese people, you know, in my classes, you know, Yemenite people in my classes, and they would always be talking about this spirit in America amongst Anglo-Saxons, referring to these people as Semites, and they didn't like Semites. Somehow the Jewish people have colonized the word Semites, and now when you say anti-Semite, it means anti-Jewish. But anti-Semitism really used to refer to anti-Lebanese, anti-Yemenite, anti-United Arab Republic, you know, all those Semitic speaking people and so on. And so those people are all cousins. I mean, they're biologically related to each other. But that's, you know, when money gets into the queue and power and money become tied to each other, people are going to do really aggressive, harsh things in order to control that money and that power. And that's what's really going on there. All right. Thanks, man. Let's take our last break, and then we'll get back into our subject. You all stick with us. We will set aside at the break here at Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right, welcome back to Living Now. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host, here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. I had a question again. I don't want to get too far off my original subject, but just on this issue about a nuclear-free Israel and this whole area. It just shows the disingenuousness of the policy framework that we operate from in the United States, that Israel gets to be a nuclear power, claim that it doesn't have any nuclear weapons. I mean, they have never admitted that they have nuclear weapons, but they probably have about 200 and so on. And they're the good guys. But other people that are in the Middle East, if they try to acquire nuclear weapons, they're horrible people, right? They all have to admit that they got nuclear weapons or trying to get nuclear weapons, and they got to denuclearize and so on. But it's okay for Israel to do it. I want to put a little postage stamp on this thing. In the run-up to World War II, you had this massive anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish sentiment in Germany. But don't just think of it as Germany. The French had this going on. The Polish had this going on. In fact, all the European countries and the United States, anti-Semitism was the currency of the day. They were all anti-Semites and so on, or had a large strain of anti-Semitism in their countries. So when World War II ends, the Israelites or the Jewish people are saying that we need a place that we can go where we don't have to, have to keep watching our backs. We can't trust ourselves around the rest of you folks because you all keep doing terrible things to us and whatnot. So, you keep calling us names, and this and that. You get mad because we're good at business, and stuff like that. So we need our own space. And we want our own space to be the space that we used to live in 2,600 years ago. Yeah, just wrap your mind about that. They have not lived there for 2,600 years. Now, there have been a few Israelites that still live, never left Palestine. But as a whole, there are probably 650 times more Israelite people living outside of Palestine as there are living inside of Palestine. I mean, just so we're clear about that. There are a lot more Jewish people that live in the United States than there are Jewish people that live in Israel right now. Probably 3 times as many Jewish people live in the United States as live in Israel. And so the point that I'm making here is that they wanted to have this area segregated for themselves at the end of World War II as a consequence of defeating the Nazis and the Axis powers, at that time. But think about what actually got done. Palestine was not actually a country. It was the name of an area, but it was not a country. It was not under a particular government. Just like Afghanistan used to not, up until the 1920s, 1930s or so, there was no country called Afghanistan. There's a whole bunch of people. There's the Urdu people over there. There's the Afghan people over there. There's the, whatever they call them, folks over there. But they were not a country. Palestine was not a country, just an area of the world, right? And so the Allied powers, to settle the deal with the Jewish people, they said, we will give you a homeland. They took the homeland from half of the territory that was occupied by the Palestinian people. So just think about that. I just want you to wrap your mind around this, right? Because truth, somebody was asking about truth. Well, let's deal with truth. Let's suppose that you got a house and there's 4 bedrooms in your house. And you live in all the bedrooms in your house. You live in the attic. You live in the basement. You live in the backyard. You live in the front yard. It's your house, right? Yeah, you got that pronoun called yours. It's your house, right? And then one day somebody got a beef going on, someplace else, right? And there was a time when some of their foreparents lived in the house that you live in now, 2,600 years ago. So your foreparents lived in that house, but you've been living in that house. In fact, you were living there before. You were living there when their foreparents were living there, and you're still living in your house, right? They're gone, right? You're living in your house. But they had a beef, the Blackstone Rangers and them had a beef, someplace, someplace far away. And the settlement that they made was, well, let's give them half of Nate's house. That's what we'll do. We'll give them half of Nate's house as a way to solve the problem that was created by these anti-Semite people, in Europe in the first place. So Nate lives in Palestine, and then one day the British and the French and the English and some other people show up and they say, excuse me. Yeah, I need that. Yeah, those 2 rooms, the kitchen, half of the basement, that's my stuff now, right? Now, when do you think I'm going to stop fighting with you about my house? When you think I'm going to say it's okay for you to just take half of my house and just take my house, right? So that's what's going on in this Palestine Israelite thing, just so we're clear. And of course, I want to weave this back into the public school education situation. This is what I need for you to understand. If you allow the ideology of Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump and those people to reign, what they would do is they would shift the financing of public education from going through public school districts, administrations, and have that money go directly to privately operated for-profit schools. That's what they've been doing over the course of her career in the Michigan school system. And remember, she's never run a school. She's never run a school. She's never run a school district. She's never run a state board. She has no administrative skill, or I can't say skill, but she has no administrative experience in operating a school district at all. And yet, she is basically pushing school districts to function, or school systems to function the way that she wants them to function, which means her friends, her well-to-do, fat cat friends, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily bad people. I assume that the people that want to start charter schools are people that have some kind of noble, ideation. They have some philanthropic, kind of interest, whatever the right word is. They're charitable spirited, type people. I'm going to believe that that's the case for most of those folks. But the reality is, wherever you allow bunches of money that does not get controlled by the public, that is not transparent in terms of how that money gets acquired, how that money gets used. Whenever you allow that to occur, corruption tends to follow that money. And so that's what's happening in the schools in Michigan right now, a state where you had 100% traditional public schools. Now 2/3 of the schools in that state are not only charter schools, there's charter schools that are run by private for-profit corporations. And what we're finding is that the very things that we try to solve in public school education is being resurrected in these private for-profit charter schools. By that I mean that you're not getting any better educational outcomes, and you're getting more segregation, both racial and economic segregation in those schools. So we have to understand, we have to process that if we allow what Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos and these folks are pushing, we're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to trust that people who have historically shown that they despise your interest, that they're going to treat you fairly. How do we know that? Well, when they developed public schools in at the end of the Civil War during the Reconstruction period, state-sponsored schools or state-financed schools came about, and universal education came about, or close to universal education came about. We went from a period where only less than a half percent of African people in the United States could read in 1865 to where 65% of African people in 1900, in a 35-year period, were now able to read at a 3rd or 4th grade level. And it just got better and better from there. Now it's just almost unheard of that you have somebody who can't read at all, right? So we went from a situation where there was no education opportunity at all for people, and people had almost nothing. People had almost nothing to work with. Now we find that we have almost universal literacy here. So in an article written by Gail Collins, I'm just trying to speed through this, in the New York Times, that is called "The Trump War on Public Schools." What she talks about is Trump fakes his concern. I mean that sincerely. He fakes his concern that the education outcomes of America's public school children, for the education outcomes of America's public school children, asserting that the education system is flush with cash, but leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. So he sounds like he cares something about our kids. But Betsy DeVos is responsible for the charter, for-profit charter school boom in Michigan, which currently costs the state about $1.1 billion a year. In a 2014 investigation by the Detroit Free Press, they found myriad examples of wasteful spending and double dipping. She used her clout to make Michigan a model of how not to improve education. She doesn't understand federal laws on education or educating disabled students, that in all her years of working in the school reform or on school reform in Detroit, she's never asked any public school principals whether they had enough resources to be able to do the work that their responsibility for these disabled students called for from them. So I really need to get more into this, and we talk about this next week. So hopefully this will be something that we can pick up on. But we got to break. We got to take care of the show sponsors, right? So we'll see you on the side. We'll see you next week here at Living Right Now. See you all next week.